for tuning in. Israel is not just a COVID-19 struck country under a second lockdown that could last a month or more. It's a country that saw 3 election rounds in less than a year and a half and might face a 4th one very soon, in a country that rounds without a state budget. Indicted Prime Minister Netanyahu is refusing to pass a state budget that will grant the economy some stability. And in the meantime, the second lockdown is expected to turn the wheel backwards and shrink back any growth that was achieved over the summer months. Experts are warning that Israel is heading towards a catastrophe, both medical and economic, that rather than giving cash to the people, which they save and don't spend, much bigger programs need to be conceived in order to stimulate the economy. Today on IBW, we ask what can be done differently in order to aid the recovery of the Israeli economy. And for that, we're joined by Professor Prof Melnick. He's the provost at the IDC Herzliya and a professor at the School of Economics and at the Lauder School of Government, former member of the Monetary Committee of the Bank of Israel. Professor Melnick, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
As we speak, Israel is under another lockdown that could last for a month or more, according to the Prime Minister. What effect do you expect this second lockdown will have on the economy?
So when we think about the effect of the second lockdown on the economy, we may learn a little bit about the first lockdown. The first lockdown had a tremendous impact on economic activity. It started as a supply shock, because people were not able to go to work, the same as here. So we have a supply shock. But on top of that, after the supply shock was alleviated and the lockdown was open, we observed that we have a demand shock that followed this supply shock. People are not consuming the way they used to consume. The business sector is not investing the way they were used to invest, and the exporters are suffering from the economic crisis in the world, so there is a very low decline in exports. The same is going to happen during the second lockdown, but again, we have the restrictions of workers to go to work, so we are talking about a broad measure of unemployment of around 20% of the labor force, maybe more. And this is going to be a prolonged period of unemployment and suffering.
Now, let's talk about the government's handling of the financial crisis so far. It chose to give cash to the public in an effort to stimulate the economy, but not a plan to keep people employed, as Germany did, for example. What should be done differently at this point?
I think that this is the biggest mistake that the government or the policymakers in general have done. And it goes to the deep understanding that policies that work under normal time do not work the same during the pandemic. People react differently. When you provide the cash to people during the pandemic, they don't go shopping. They are fronting extreme uncertainty, and they don't know if they're going to be able to go to job or to get sick. So most of this cash that goes directly to the people goes to savings, except for people that are under a very limited income. So those policies were not effective during the pandemic. And the idea is that we have to separate the policies that are effective during the pandemic to the policies that will be needed after the vaccine is effective. What should be done and wasn't done during this first period is to rehabilitate the health system that was in a bad shape when we started this problem. To rehabilitate the educational system is not acceptable. That in the startup nation in the 21st century, students or people at home do not have computers, are not available to enjoy the limited and the problematic education that can be supplied at this time. To rehabilitate the welfare system of the economy. All those things should have been done. In addition to that, And I think that people are understanding, but they are not doing it to the large extent. We have to implement job trainings for the unemployed and for people that are on what is called unpaid vacation, because the labor market they are going to face after the vaccine is a complete different labor market. So they need to be prepared, especially in the areas of information technology, the use of computer, the use of online systems. This can change the life of people.
All this needs to be paid for. Somehow the deficit is growing. When can we expect to see tax increases?
Deficits are growing and are growing at this point for the wrong reason, I think. But most of the cash advances that were given, even to people that don't need it, were a waste of money and a waste of ammunition for budgets that you will need after the vaccine is found. I am not so concerned about the deficits if the expenditures that you do are expenditures in productive things and in restoring full employment, like infrastructure investment. I think that we started this pandemic at a very good starting point. Our debt relative to GDP was around 60%, which is very low in comparison with what is happening around the world. Even if we double the amount of infrastructure investment, we will not run into debts and deficits that cannot be corrected immediately after that. But that's the deficit is the second priority at this time. Okay? The first priority before the vaccine is to supply basic income to the unemployed people, to the self-employed, to the small businesses, and this is what the government has to do in addition to installing the job training that I mentioned before. Nothing more.
So you don't expect to see tax increases?
I don't see tax increases. On the opposite, I think that part of the program that should be implemented after the vaccine can even include declines in taxes.
Okay. Now, the country is run without a state budget. There's great instability, both political and financial. What could be the outcome in the short run and in the long run?
Well, this is a terrible problem because the most grave problem that we are living in is the uncertainty. And I think that living without a national budget increases uncertainty to the degree that we haven't experienced in the past and no other country around the world has experienced. People don't know what the government is doing, what are the priorities, how this is going to be paid, who is going to lend, or to whom, from whom the government is going to borrow to finance its expenditures. The uncertainty that increases due to the fact that we are without a budget is a terrible problem for the Israeli economy.
Okay, Professor Prof Melnick, Provost at the IDC Herzliya, thank you very much. Definitely some very important insights there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.